or questions that are in the chat, or simply turn on your microphone and you can ask a question. This is a fairly small group, and so we're happy to be informal and interrupt if you have any questions as we go along. So I will see if I can advance slides on this. Hopefully I will be able to. So, as I noted at the outset, we presented the budget to the City Council, and I say we because I was joined by the school board, Chair Downs, and the Superintendent Noonan, and we presented the proposed budget to the City Council on March 27th. At that time, I noted the fact that the city is in a period of growth in the city. You can see it in the cranes that you see in the new construction. You can see it in the capital improvements that we're investing in, and a lot of that construction is underway. And that became sort of an organizing principle and theme of the budget. So growing with vision is something that we'll walk through with the budget in the ways that this budget supports that vision. We'll talk about tax rates and fees, and we'll talk about the schedule, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So it's about 20 slides, and I'll try to go through them fairly quickly, and we look forward to your questions and the discussion afterwards. So in terms of the overall big picture on the proposed 2024 budget, it is a budget at $118 million, or a 4.9% growth over the current year. The general government and the school components of the local budget are growing at about 5.25%. The City Council and the school board have been carrying out the principles of revenue sharing for the past 4 budgets, and that is continued in this budget, and that allows for greater predictability and planning in the budget process. I'll go to the next slide and talk about some of the main themes making the City Council in its budget guidance that was adopted back in December called for the budget to uphold excellent government services, sustain our award-winning school system, provide for a capital improvements program, and we'll talk about that. It is a transformative CIP with significant investments, particularly in transportation, and advancing community priorities, all in the context of looking out for the city's long-term fiscal stability and being responsible with that. One of the key things in the budget, and this also was in budget guidance back in December, is to invest in our workforce. The budget does provide a 6% merit increase for employees and a similar increase for our police that they are in a STEP and COLA plan. And we're also investing in training and professional development for our workforce. All of the initiatives in this budget require dedicated professional staff to carry out this work in step with community, in partnership with community, and this investment is a crucial investment. We are in a period right now of a very tight and competitive labor market, and we also have a number of vacancies in the city organization that reflects that competitive market. And so we're trying to make sure that we're making investments in our workforce so we can carry this work forward together. Some other ways that we're growing. We are growing together with a focus on equity and inclusion. And that includes investments in the Affordable Housing Fund in the amount of $120,000, emergency rent, a higher level of support for our non-government organizations in the city. They compete for grants through the city's Housing Services Advisory Committee, HSAC, and so we're increasing that from the current level of $86,000 to a level of $116,000 in the proposed budget. We're also benefiting from grants through the CDBG program, which we'll be using for maintenance of our quadplexes that have been acquired in the Virginia Village area. We're growing greener as a city. So some of the investments in the budget in terms of environmental sustainability, a lot of those are in the CIP, looking towards flood mitigation and green infrastructure, both to be a more resilient city to the effects of climate change, but also to do our part in trying to mitigate carbon emissions and climate change. We're moving our fleet towards a more sustainable footing with electric vehicles. A lot of that is with grant dollars. We are spending money on sanitary sewer backflow prevention. As many will remember, when we've had heavy rains in the past, because of inflow into our sanitary sewer collection, sometimes that can backflow into people's basement. We're making investments to reduce the probability of that. And we're also planning for locally generated solar. And the schools are going to be implementing solar panels at Meridian High School this coming year, and we're looking for opportunities to apply for grants to do that at other city facilities. We're working right now with community to develop our energy transition plans. We had a great town hall meeting back on April 20th as we developed that together, and I want to thank the ESC and Andy Young, our Environmental Sustainability Coordinator for working that planning effort together. As we grow, we're growing safely, and so the budget invests in additional school resource officer. We currently have one that is based primarily at Meridian and Mary Ellen Henderson, and this budget funds an additional one that will be focused on Oak Street and our elementary schools. We have an initiative in the budget to provide mental health response support for our police department when we get 911 calls where mental health issues are exhibited in that call. That's a really important public safety initiative, and we're using a staffing that we already have on board with the Aurora House Girls Home. So it's a very creative and innovative way to provide that support and for safety for our community. We are expanding camera enforcement for speed enforcement in the city for the first time. We were granted that authority from the General Assembly, and we're now moving forward to do that in the school zone associated with the 800 and 900 blocks of West Broad Street. We're also looking to expand Photo Red with an additional intersection. We're working through the details of that, but that will likely be at the Annandale and South Washington intersection. This is based on the accident data that drives those types of decisions. We're making investments in building safety. I mentioned at the beginning all the construction activity that's happening in the city. The budget funds an additional right-of-way inspector to make sure that all the construction activity in our right-of-way is happening safely, and an additional fire inspector. The budget also makes investments in our Fire Station 6, which we operate in partnership with Arlington County. As we grow, one of the top priorities of the City Council is that we grow more walkable and bikeable so that everyone can use our streets safely. The big area of investment in the budget is through the Capital Improvements Program. We have $93 million of projects over the 6-year planning period, much of which is grant funded from state and federal and regional sources for intersection improvements and other facility improvements to make the city more walkable and more enjoyable to bike in and walk in. In the operating budget, we sustain the neighborhood traffic calming program and also have funding for pavement, for regular repaving, traffic signal maintenance, sidewalks, and street lighting. As we grow in the city, we are also trying to grow the economy. This is an important initiative of the city that try to grow the commercial tax base and mitigate some of the costs of government services on our residential tax base. Some of the ways we're doing that is with tourism marketing to help our hotels, restaurants, and retail establishments. We're doing that in partnership with grant dollars through the Virginia Department of Tourism. Ongoing investments in downtown beautification using a portion of the hotel tax for the flowers and banners and other types of good things that we do in our commercial districts. As we plan for growth, we're also using developer fees to buy additional capacity for sanitary sewer treatment. And then the last one is that first bullet. The budget provides additional support for a grant administration. We have a lot of grants that are coming through the federal government with recent legislation that was passed, and the city is getting a strong share of those grants for investments in the community, but we need to administer those grants effectively. As we grow, it's very important that we preserve all the things we love in the city, preserving our small town character with our well-loved Mary Riley Stiles Library. The budget proposes to increase the hours on weekends from basically adding 2 hours per weekend. The council is working through some investments in our special events, possibly additional library hours, and community energy plan implementation using some of the contingency funds that are built into the budget. And the CIP will be moving forward with park investments, including the Fellows Park, which the city acquired about 4 years ago to implement the master plan that the Rec and Parks Advisory Board developed this past year. The CIP, as I mentioned, is a transformative CIP. It's a very ambitious CIP. $154 million is planned over the 6-year period. Most of that is in the realm of transportation with $93 million. We're also investing in facilities in our fleet and our parks. One notable project is some front entrance expansions for the Oak Street School. That's our main school facility item in the CIP. The purchase of additional sanitary sewer capacity, as well as the backflow prevention through investing in our stormwater collection system. That's $24 million. And then stormwater flood mitigation is a top priority for the city. We've been very successful in getting federal and state grants to help pay for that program of $12 million of flood mitigation projects throughout the city. And those grants are going to help us mitigate some of the earlier planned rate increases that were discussed about 3 years ago. And so that's good news for our taxpayers. As noted, our funding sources, our main source of funding is grants, with $81 million of grants proposed in the CIP. And Councilmember Snyder is here in the room, and he's been instrumental in the city in working with our regional partners to help bring those grants to the city. The other thing I will note is that there's no debt proposed in this budget, either this year or next year. We obviously extended ourselves with a lot of bonding to pay for the library, city hall improvements, and most notably Meridian High School. And so we're taking a break from debt issuances out of the general fund for the next several years of planning. And then one other note, we are planning to draw down our capital reserves. We built up capital reserves to give the city some financial strength as we made that, particularly that significant investment in Meridian High School. And now we'll use that capital reserve, draw that down in a responsible way on needed improvements for the community. Tax rates. So shifting now to the the revenue side, what is proposed in the budget is no change to the real estate tax rate of $1.23 per $100 of assessed value. The City Council has acted to lower the tax rate by 12.5 cents over the past 2 years. This year, with a more modest increases in assessed value of about 3.6% for residential portion of our tax base. This budget does not propose a change in the rate. The council will be the final decider of that, again, at their final consideration on May 8th. With respect to the car tax, there's been a lot of swings in valuations related to supply chain disruptions related to the pandemic. Last year, we decreased the personal property tax rate by 70 cents because of those increase in valuations. Now, as prices are returning a bit more to normal, we're proposing to increase the rate by 50 cents. So it's still a 20-cent decrease relative to where we were 2 years ago. And because assessed values are dropping pretty sharply, the average taxpayer in the city will see about a 9% or 8.8% decrease in their personal property tax bill, even with that increase in the rate. So overall, assessed value in the city is growing 5.5%. Our largest area of growth this year is in the commercial sector, with 6.6% of market growth and 4% of growth related to new construction in the commercial sector. Now, commercial does include apartments, but we did actually have growth in assessed value for both retail and office in this year's assessments. The city's overall assessed value is now $5.4 billion. So for Tina's benefit, she tracks this. 1 penny on the tax rate generates $540,000. This is the impact on the median homeowner's tax bill. I noted just a moment ago that the City Council has taken actions to lower the tax rate because of rising assessed values in recent years, but also as we have executed our financial plan to build the new high school. We have more room to maneuver in terms of our fiscal sustainability. So we've been able to lower the tax rate. The tax bill for your average homeowner in the city would increase $364, though, because of the increase in assessed value. Two last notes on our utility funds. I have recommended to the City Council a 3% increase in our sewer rates, and that would be about a $15 per year impact for your average homeowner. And then on the stormwater side, a 4% increase in the fee that homeowners pay as commercial, all property owners pay in the city. And that would be an $11 increase from $257 to about $268 for your average homeowner in the city. Both the sanitary sewer and the stormwater funds, those increases are really driven by inflation and by cost increases that we're grappling with our contractors and buying supplies. So taking all that together with the average impact of $364 for the real estate, an average decrease of about $100 for your average household for the vehicle tax, and then the sanitary and stormwater fees, an overall impact of about just under $300 for your average homeowner in the city. So I'll wrap things up with respect to the schedule. I've noted at the beginning, the council started this all off with budget guidance back in December. The school board adopted its recommendations back in February. We presented combined recommendations to the City Council on March 27th, and now we're working towards the end of the budget process with final markup on Monday, May 1st, and adoption on May 8th. The new budget, once it is adopted, would go into effect on July 1st. That's the beginning of the city's fiscal year. I forgot about these last two slides. This is a little bit of a preview for the discussion on Monday night with the City Council. So we've had public hearings, and as we've gone through these public hearings, community has come forward with requests. And so this is a list of some of the requests. These are some ones that would be built into the operating budget, so we'd either need to use the contingency or make reductions elsewhere in the budget to be able to fund these, but requests for additional funding for affordable housing, a crossing guard at Broad and Spring, which we haven't had there for the past 4 years, but to restore that, additional library hours at 60,000. Some funding for implementing some of the energy plans that I just mentioned a moment ago in the amount of $25,000, and enhanced special events in the amount of $50,000. So that's some of the comment that the council has received for some of the ongoing items. Some things that could be handled with one-time dollars. We will have underspending in this year's budget due to vacancies that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. And so here's some things that could be funded with some one-time money, like holiday lighting, some additional money for human services grants with our non-government partners, conducting a tree inventory, some enhancements in the Tenor Hill Heritage District, and some additional investments in environmental sustainability also tied to the energy plans. So those are some of an example of some of the requests that have come through the process that the council will be considering at markup. So here's the ways that you can contact us, and we do have departmental budget videos that are available for the public to view, and they're, I think, very informative, and I want to thank all of our department directors for working with Falls Church TV to produce those and make those available to the public. So I'll stop there and look forward to any questions or comments, suggestions that you might have in this budget. And I will note this is all being taped so that this can be streamed at your convenience or for the public's convenience anytime between now and budget adoption. Susan, I'll turn it over to you to help, if people raise their hands or have any comments in the chat.
Absolutely. We do have one question in the chat. Ms. Ehrman is wondering about the rapid response crew, what their purpose is. And I did point out that it is mentioned in the city manager's message on page 10, but if you know more about it, to share.
So it's a great question, and that is one I should have emphasized a bit more in the presentation because it's a really important initiative that the City Council has asked staff to develop. We get requests from residents throughout the city concerned about safety issues on our streets, pedestrian safety or cyclist safety. Oftentimes it's around school bus stops or on our walking routes to schools. And as I mentioned, our CIP has a lot of grant-funded projects, but those are slow. And so when residents come forward, it's usually not very satisfactory for us to say, hey, in 5 years or 6 years, we'll be able to address that. So the council has sought ways that we could respond more quickly, either with better markings on the street, signage, putting in some traffic calming at locations, or bump outs on the sidewalk so that people waiting for the school bus, have a safer refuge off the street. These are things that we can do either with contractors or to do in-house. Because of today's contracting environment, the economy is still quite supercharged, and it is difficult to get contractors to come in and do projects quickly in the city. So we're proposing to have some additional staff that would work out of the property yard under the supervision of a transportation engineer to be able to rapidly go out onto the street and do these types of projects in response to resident requests. So the cost of that is about $360,000 for those additional staff capacity, plus the equipment they'll need to be able to do their job effectively. Happy to answer any other questions about that, but that is one of the key initiatives in this year's budget.
Thank you. That hopefully answers her question. I don't see anyone else's hands raised or questions in the chat, but we could certainly give it a moment to see if anyone is typing or about to raise their hand.
And while we're waiting, I will just note Cindy Mester is on this call, and she led the development of our capital improvements program working with staff. And Caitlin Sobsey has been our key grant manager for many of the projects that are in the CIP, and she took a great leadership role this year in presenting the CIP to the Planning Commission and the City Council. So that's been a great leadership team for the CIP. And we also have Kieran Bawa, who is on this call. She's our finance director, and it's her shop that really does all of the hard work and sort of brain power and tying all this together to be responsive to the City Council and community in these budget proposals. And I see that we do have a hand up.
Councilmember Duncan, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think last night I heard a discussion briefly of the resources directed towards the urban forestry group, and I think the question that was posed, you said you'd get some more information on it, maybe too soon for new information to come in. It was basically, as I understood it, sort of a trade-off or a comparison between urban forestry and some of the public works resources and how those numbers grow at the end of the budget that you presented here.
So in the budget proposal, we are funding key things for urban forestry, the maintenance of hazardous trees, the removal of hazardous trees, the maintenance of streetscape, the planters that you see all along Broad Street and now on South Washington Street with the new streetscape that's been installed there, as well as maintenance of our parks and other green spaces in the city. So working with staff, we've tried to sustain adequate funding for those key services for all the green space in the city, including our urban forest. In terms of new spending, what my recommendation has been, and I think it reflects sort of the collective view of our Department of Public Works, is funding on some of our core infrastructure, like our sidewalks, our traffic signals, our paving program, because those are areas where we do receive a lot of concerns about the condition of our pavement in the city. So we've been trying to make sure we sustain funding on that, and we'll also be working with the council. I mentioned some of the one-time money that we'll be allocating. Staff will be advocating for use of any underspending in the current year to be repurposed towards taking care of some of those basic city needs in our transportation infrastructure. So on the balance, that is where we have been trying to make sure that we are restoring some investment, that some of those things got cut all the way back in the Great Recession, and we've been trying to get money back towards those things. But I don't think it is enough, and we certainly hear from our citizens that they'd like more investment in those areas.
Okay, good, thanks. Good answer. One other question, process question. I think I heard Mr. Snyder last night just ask, what's the timetable for basically the supplemental budget that would take into consideration underspending for this fiscal year? What's the timing of when that data will be available? And is there a subsequent September supplemental anticipated that would, suck up some of the money from other accounts that would become available or become evident?
So I think there are two processes for everyone to keep an eye on. After the adoption of the FY24 budget, we then do shift our focus in June to doing kind of the final budget amendment for the current fiscal year. And that budget amendment will be our sort of our early projections of what underspending and principally underspending will be for the year. We'll also be looking at our revenue forecasts, and we will have a revenue surplus in FY23. That was clear with our mid-year financial report, and I think those trends are continuing with our third quarter financial report, which we're developing right now. So the month of June is when we have our initial kind of bite at the apple for that, and then we have our complete wrap-up of the current fiscal year in September. It takes us until September because we don't get sales taxes and meals taxes until a month or two after the end of the fiscal year. And we also wrap up all of our encumbrances and wrap up all of our spending over that month of July and August as well. So that's why it takes till September to wrap up our current fiscal year.
Yeah, that's right. I had my months a little bit off, but that's a good explanation. All right, well, my only final thought is, given the, what you just said, the availability of resources later in the summer and early in the fall, I'm putting in a request. Citizens have requests. I'm a citizen, so I'm putting in a request for consideration of continuing tapering down the tax rate with some of the resources that we're pretty sure are going to be available. I'm not going to name a number, but if Tina Herman's 1 cent, $540,000 figure, that's a ballpark of what I would like to see us, at least as a council, discuss and, make decisions about trade-offs and priorities that other folks have. But something in the order of $500,000 to be at least in discussion, so we can exercise that muscle of tax restraint at a time when we're pretty confident that things are going okay and there's no big black swan events facing us. All right, thanks much.
Thank you.
We do have a follow-up question from Ms. Ehrman. She's asking, in regards to the rapid response crew, is the traffic calming we undertake normally longer term, and the rapid response crew will get those smaller projects done faster?
So the purpose of the rapid response crew would be to do things that don't need to go through that neighborhood traffic calming vetting program. So we typically do any kind of changes to the street, like putting in new speed bumps or changing the geometry of streets with new traffic calming things that are quite impactful to the character of the street. We like to see strong support in the neighborhood for those before we implement them. So we would keep that process in place for those types of projects. For things that are, either light solutions, putting down paint, better markings, or signage, or some bricks and mortar types of things that don't require that full citizen engagement, those are the types of things we'd want this rapid response team to address. And I see Cindy's turned on her camera, and she's been working closely with her NTC team, and she might have some things to add as well.
Good evening, Wyatt Council and our community attendees. That captures the most of it. I did want to just sort of reinforce that the smaller projects are the ones that don't need engineering as well as the community engagement, so they can be responsive quicker, sort of administratively safety. And then we have the community piece, as Mr. Shields just described, and then part of the reason for the benefit of the rapid response team, as I think Mr. Shields, you mentioned during the presentation, is these capital projects take longer to design, but also with the grant money, they just take longer to execute. So we're trying to balance that long-term infrastructure and the quicker community response needs.
Thank you, Cindy. And one other argument that we've made for the council's consideration is that in having this be with staff as opposed to with contractors, we do get the benefit is that is additional staff strength for when we're dealing with emergencies, when we're pushing snow. This crew would help with that, and I would be right there shoulder to shoulder with our Public Works operations staff for those types of events, and they would be there to help with leaf pickup. And for the past, 2 years ago in particular, we've been struggling with maintaining full staffing levels in operations, and so we got behind on leaf pickup. Last year, we hit our target of having leaves all picked up by the 1st of January, essentially, or basically at that time we were just doing mop up. But we really like to get those leaves up before the Christmas holiday. That's ideal, and having that additional in-house staff will help us stay on track with that as well. So we've got a very clear job for this rapid response team, but it'll also be kind of a force multiplier, force enhancer for our other core DPW operations services.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Ehrman, and looks like she wants to close out her thought with, it's a good idea and kudos to whomever thought of it. Thank you for that positivity. I don't see any other questions or hands raised at this time.
All right, well then, I see we have one member of the audience now, Councilmember Mary Beth Connolly. Do you have any questions? Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for facilitating this meeting, and Tina and John. Thank you for tuning in. Again, this is available to the public, so I'm sure this will get more eyeballs as we go through the budget process as well. Everyone, have a great evening, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you for your time.
Have a great evening.
All right, thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. I feel like this was the best presentation we've ever done.
Indeed.
I don't know. This is a funny mic because you can't turn it off.